Hello, everyone. My name is Kris Barton, and the folks at AIM have asked me to put together a brief history of RFID, which can be a little difficult given everything that we've been through, but I've tried to summarize a few details here for everyone and kind of some key milestone dates and activity and adoption. As a background for me, as I mentioned, my name is Kris Barton. I started in the RFID space back in the early 2000s with a company that some of you may be aware of called Globe Ranger, which is still around. And then in 2006, moved over to UPM RFID, which was later acquired by SmartTrack, and then later SmartTrack was acquired by Avery Dennison. In 2011, I made the transition over from UPM RFID to Avery Dennison, have been there since. So it's been an interesting ride. I've seen a lot of things come and go, a lot of great activity in the space, and would just like to share a couple of those key milestones along the way. So many people are aware that RFID got its early beginnings in World War II, just kind of a friend or foe with the aircraft and identifying whether or not they should let that person land or if they're an enemy and they should shoot them down. So that was very early days. And then later on, there was some activity in the EAS space. So Sensormatic and Checkpoint were the primary players in there, and it was very proprietary in nature. And so a couple of people got together and looked and said, hey, how do we make this a little bit better for the general public and create some standards? So a group was formed at MIT. The Auto ID Lab came about and started to look at how they could create some standards to make it a little bit more of a freer market in this space and take advantage of some of the technology that is out there and has advanced. One of the key things that came about with that group was they focused on a couple of key technologies that were available in the market. We had UHF passive with class 0, class 1, forming those together and getting those two groups together, formulating class 1 Gen 2 was a key momentum change for the space because it allows you to write once, write many times, read many times. That is the class 1 Gen 2 standard. In terms of a timeline, 2004, we saw that class 1 Gen 2 tag standard come about. And along with that, at the same time, AIM formed the RFID expert group, which is a very key milestone in the industry because it brought together a lot of thinking minds that helped to move the industry along in several different ways, not just standards, but also in the ways of working. The next year, the Uniform Council Code and EPC Global merged into GS1. This was a pretty big move for the industry and really helped to drive a lot of the standards that we see in the space today. At the same time, AIM published the item level tagging position statement, which was a really big move for the industry, mainly in the apparel sector, because it helped people understand, how do I use the RFID tag? Where do I put it? Just some basic, simple things like that. So that was a pretty big milestone for the space. 2008, from 2008 to 2013, we saw some key retail adoption. So we saw a lot of retailers like Macy's, JCPenney's, brands such as Levi's starting to move into this space and doing some item level tagging. In 2011, I'm proud to say that Avery Dennison celebrated its 1 billionth transponder or RFID tag sold, which was a pretty big industry move. Being one of the largest players, we were very proud of that. In the next window, if you will, basically 2013, 2014, we saw a transition from your traditional push model, your traditional channel model in the retail space to omni-channel. This was a big unlock for the RFID industry. This started things like buy online, pick up in store. While it was still very early back then, people needed to know what they had in the store so they could make those commitments for things like ship from store or pick up in store. So that was a big piece of the puzzle, and it moved away from just your traditional longer life cycle SKUs like men's underwear, basics, men's denim, those kind of things, into fast fashion items as well. So that was an interesting transformation space and really kind of picked things up for the RFID space. The next big move, as many of you are aware, 2020, we had COVID hit. A lot of people couldn't go into the stores, so omni-channel just got accelerated extremely fast. It was fuel on the fire. Everybody needed to know what they had in the store so they could commit for things like curbside pickup. All these kind of new ways of working in the retail space emerged, and RFID helped people get to that space because they understood what they had. As we migrated even further in 2021, 2022, we saw a couple of key retailers adopt self-checkout. This is really interesting because it sped up the queues and helped the retailers create less friction in the environment. The frictionless shopping experience also enabled other items that may not have been thought about being tagged before now are being tagged because it's necessary in order to do the self-checkout to have all the items tagged. And the ROI is there for many cases. As we progress even further, general merchandise was adopted by Walmart. So this move in 2021, 2022 is yet another new space that is being adopted with RFID. So we're moving out of just general retail for apparel into things like electronics and toys and tires, all these other general merchandise categories. That trend of adoption is continuing. And we're seeing 2023, we're seeing more movement there. And we're proud to say that we earlier this year announced Avery Dennison has done 90 billion RFID tags to date in the program. And also, while we're all here, AIM turned 50. So we're here to celebrate a little bit of the AIM 50 years in business as a group and all the great work that they've done along the way. To kind of give you a sense of how the category adoption happened, I want to lay out a few key windows and milestone dates. Between 2005 and 2010, as I mentioned earlier, there was a lot of adoption in maybe longer life cycle SKUs that had some complexity to it. So men's denim or denim in general, footwear, men's dress shirts, shoes. These are things that have long life cycle SKUs, but they also have some complexity. So in pants, you have waist and length. In shoes, you have a lot of styles and colors that might be there. Same with the men's dress shirts, similar to the pants. There's a lot of sizes and arm lengths and things like that. So being able to identify what assortment you have was really important. So that's really where it started. And shoe display was also another area that was a big piece, because understanding that what do you have in the back that may or may not be on display on the front is a big problem for shoe retailers. So RFID was enabling that to be a much simpler process with much lower labor costs. In 2010 to 2015, we saw some additional category adoption in some other new areas like accessories and soft home. These had similar complexities as the other categories, but they were just newer adoption, and we saw some movement in that space by several key retailers. Post that, as I mentioned, in 2021 to current, we saw some adoption in some general merchandise categories. This was a big unlock for many retailers, and it's continuing to be a trend going forward. Things like toys, electronics, tires, hard home goods as well, starting to see adoption in the space, and many of you may be already working to get your items in that category tagged. Going forward, we're seeing additional adoption in a few other areas, such as food and beauty. These are big unlocks for the industry as well. In beauty, you have a lot of complexity in knowing what you have and being able to commit to the customer. There's a lot of choices. They all look very similar on the shelf, things like that. Food, very important for several reasons. You have a lot of need to understand what you have, but also there are expiration date ramifications that are in place that you need to know about. You have labor costs that you can minimize through the use of RFID and proper rotation of your stock. So we're seeing that as a big unlock going forward for several different people. A few other key adoptions over the last 15 years I think are interesting to note. Pre-2010, we saw some adoption by the US military in RFID. Primarily the Defense Department was pretty instrumental in moving forward with item level tagging and case level tagging. Baggage tagging became a big deal in the early 2010s. Folks like Delta, the Las Vegas Airport, Hong Kong International Airport, baggage tagging, big move. It was really interesting to see how that got picked up. Less luggage lost, something simpler for everybody, right? Nobody wants to see their luggage get lost. We saw some adoption in the pharma space as well. Some key players such as KitCheck, BlueSight, looking at RFID as a way to enable a lot of key pieces and make the pharma industry a little bit smoother and more efficient in several ways. Logistics tagging, this has become a huge piece of the industry. UPS has announced their big move into the RFID space with their item tagging for their cases and their shipments. FedEx as well doing some item level stuff for their pallets in the ground business. And then food, as I mentioned, Chipotle made a big announcement a year or two ago about moving forward with case level tagging to be able to track things like expiration to make sure that they have everything out of their space that may have some sort of expiration issue, enabling recalls to be much more efficient in the food space. And then the newest one, or maybe not quite as new, cannabis. So we're seeing some adoption. Obviously, as this becomes a legalized piece, at least in the US and several states, there are several ways that people need to identify what they have and track it for regulative purposes. This is a big deal, and RFID is helping some of the biggest players in that space be more efficient with how they manage that data and how they report back to regulatory services. And the last one that I always like to reference back is, for those of you that are familiar with the Big Bang Theory show in the US, Dr. Sheldon Cooper on the Big Bang Theory RFID'd his socks on season 2, episode 7, so that you can Google on that or find that YouTube episode. You can see where Dr. Sheldon Cooper tagged his socks, which was a pretty funny episode. That was back in 2009, so that's still quite a while ago. So after all of that, the real big key unlock is the data. That's the one thing that everybody has in common with the adoption for RFID. Being able to take the data that you get, collect it fast, get it accurate, and then make some sort of adjustment to what you need to do. I always say that RFID helps fix your problems. What it really does is actually shines the light and identifies where the problem is so that you can fix it. So I thank you for your time, and I appreciate it. Here is my contact, my LinkedIn profile. If you need to connect, I'm happy to connect with you at some other time. Thank you very much for your time.